conversation.
Carry on the conversation. So it's really nice to meet you because we've never met in person, and we were connected through our good friend Erin,
Yes.
which I think I had pronounced her name wrong before. It's Paretos, right? I think I wanted to call her Paderos or one of the other.
I always call her Portos, so
Okay,
she can choose which one she likes best.
I figured I would get it wrong. And so your name is Laura Tolhook, and your company is called Essential HR Canada. And I'm so glad to chat with you today because what you and I do is so synchronous in so many ways. There are so many questions that I get that I can't answer as a LinkedIn profile writer, as a LinkedIn trainer. Your expertise is human resources. So I'm so excited that we're going to be talking today about this because it's not my wheelhouse. So I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro that you partner with small businesses in a really ultra flexible way so that you can focus on their core operations and passions. So you do this virtually, and you work, I guess, in just in piecemeal with organizations to sort of do whatever they sort of need ad hoc from
Yeah. So a lot of organizations, despite their size, they have employee issues. They have ideas that they want to have and formats of what they want to do for recruiting, for onboarding. But unless you're a certain size, and I mean, we think we might talk about that later, there's probably not a need when you're an 8-person operation to have a full-time HR manager with 15 years of experience behind you on your team. It's not practical. So when I started the business, it was because I had all these friends and family who were reaching out with a question here and a question there. I thought, you know what? These people deserve great support. Mm-hmm. So I worked for some big names, some big businesses in retail and operations and hospitality. But I thought I want to take this like amazing experience that I've had in these big budget HR places and make it unique and make it customized for these small operations, because at the end of the day, nobody needs to lose sleep over a decision that they can pick up the phone and ask us. And so we help provide fractional support to those small businesses who are growing their teams and who are building their businesses.
That's amazing. That was the word I was looking for, was fractional. And so that's amazing because when I first started teaching at Durham College and some of my students were in human resources, I learned that I think they all thought that they were going to be in human resources, just sitting in an office and being able just to have these great chats with people. The people were just going to come and they were going to sit. And it's so like human resources is so much more complicated than that. They said, I didn't realize I was going to need to know a lot more about law and about like policies and things like that. So I think their eyes were quite wide open because I think they just thought it was going to be like a social, like, okay, so tell me about your problems.
Well, and there's a lot of people who love that. It's never really been my forte. I'm a pretty, I don't want to say unemotional, but if people come and cry in my office, I'm like, Candy, employee assistance program? Like I'm not a very good psychologist, but I know employment law and I know human rights law. So yeah, there's this dichotomy that, they think HR is soft. And at the end of the day, there's a great balance that you need to have to make sure that you are keeping a low amount of risk to the business, but making sure that you're engaging the employees and not destroying the morale all at the same time. So it's this fantastic balance. And yeah, a lot of people go into HR because they're like, I love people. And then once you're with people 24/7, dealing with the hardest concerns that people have, you're like, I am ready to not talk to people and go home and read a book.
Absolutely. And I don't know if we can get into this because I didn't send you the question ahead of time, but you can maybe think about it, percolate it, is sort of the discussion about, Gen Z in the workplace and how that's really changing because of mental health. And we can talk about that a little bit later, but I have some, like my brain's already going like so far into like what I can ask you, but I've got some questions ahead of time. So today we're talking obviously about human resources and building a bulletproof hiring strategy. So that's so crucial too. So you said before you chose your career in human resources is it because you really liked policy, or what made you just decide to go down that path?
I was one of the same, 20-something-year-olds who loved people and, naturally an extrovert, people light me up. And so I thought, well, with my business degree, I can do PR or marketing or HR. They gave you like 3 streams. And luckily I chose the one that I'm actually, grown to really love, because when you're 19 and trying to choose the career for the rest of your life, you don't always hit it right the first time. But thankfully I went into HR and I've loved it ever since. But yeah, it was definitely because I loved being around people. Now, as I've grown it, I've loved that to figure out what the balance is. Like I mentioned before, like small business owners, it's a tough gig. There is so much tenacity that small business owners have to have, and you're wearing all the hats. And so as I went through HR, I realized that there's this balance. If we're all business focused and bottom line focused and we are not compassionate to the individuals in our building, we're going to have a problem. But if we're not looking at the risk management side, if we're saying, you know what, we're a great operation, we do things on a handshake, you're going to get bit in the butt on the business side. So there's this great balance that HR gets to have. And I think being in that middle portion of it is one of my favorite things.
Yeah, because you definitely have to balance the needs of the operation, the needs of the organization and their strategic plan and all that other stuff with the needs of the people. And so I think of that in any kind of strategy, both has to come from the top down and from the bottom up. Mm-hmm. And the corporate culture really is about that, like truly in a strategic way of how do we empower people to make great decisions without having them sort of go rogue and feral and things like that, and having to find that fun balance in between where people feel empowered, to participate without sort of letting them kind of go off.
And there's a really big science-based approach to HR as well. Like you think about some of these policies we've heard of in the last decade, like the unlimited vacation. It's like, oh, that's amazing. And then what they found is that people took less because they didn't know how to manage that balance and they didn't want to look like they're upset. So some of these great ideas that we've had as HR people along the line, it's actually a science-based approach that we're like, okay, that doesn't work. We need to figure out a better way of supporting people without this unlimited vacation that nobody takes.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it is funny. And now that people are now struggling with the pandemic, mm-hmm. and people are working from home, and that's going to be a really interesting world that we're going to be sort of re-navigating, hopefully, as the world starts to open up again, fingers crossed, that, having people work from home, we probably realize that we are much more productive than people thought, like instead of having bums in seats, right?
And the opposite side of that, we are more productive. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Like whereas before I personally would meet with maybe one client on a Tuesday afternoon. Now I have 3 back-to-back sales calls.
Yeah.
And 3 times the work to prepare for all of that. And I'm I'm not unique in that. A lot of us, even who work for big organizations, we're doing more and we're exhausted because of it. So there's a flip side to that. Yeah, we're more productive and it's exhausting us.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have said that to me. So I have been working from home for I don't know how many years. Like since I started my business in 2009, I've been remote, and people would say to me like, I don't know how you do it, Leslie. I think they thought that the television was going to be on. I'd be sitting watching like soap operas all day if that was still a thing, but it's not. And really, finding that balance is important. And I think people realize, especially during the pandemic, that that they aren't sitting like at the fridge all the time, or they're not sitting in front of the television. In fact, they're actually, to your point, they're working more than ever before, which they have to sort of balance out for sure.
Yeah, the water cooler conversations where we talked about what happened in The Bachelor the night before for 25 minutes. Those are things where our brain relaxed and we were productive afterwards. So yeah, we got 25 more minutes of work time in because we didn't have a water cooler conversation, but did it really help us at the end of the day?
Right. Yeah. And I do miss that. I do miss being around my friends, and some of them have popped in here to comment on this side there. So Angela was sort of saying that his the human resources manager in his organization got into the field loving the law and policy style work and happened to be good with people. And so I think, that's a big part of it too, is that policy part and compliance and all those kinds of things as well. And having that responsibility is a tough one.
Yeah, it's gray. We love to think HR is black and white, but there's a lot of gray, and navigating the gray is kind of where a lot of us love.
Yeah. So Steve Jones is asking if when there's a conflict between corporate risk and what an employee needs, the assumption is that the corporate needs wins out. Is this accurate? Good question, Steve Jones.
Oh gosh, that's a big question. At the end of the day, the corporate risk is going to be what's considered first. And the employee needs most likely are going to come second, because there's very few corporations that are going to put themselves at risk for the employee needs. Now I'm thinking like termination, right? Like I'm thinking they're going to put the needs of the corporation in terms of risk management likely before the needs of the employee, which is, the pat on the back. So is it accurate? Probably. Is there a lot more questions in there and situations that we could probably go through that would make a lot more sense? Yeah. But at the end of the day, HR is there to help protect the business and help build the culture of the organization. So there is a balance for sure.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the question that I had in the beginning, where I thought I'll leave you to it for a little bit, but I'll give you my scenario, which was I had a student this past semester who couldn't meet any of the deadlines because of mental health issues, and so
Mhm.
under the Human Rights Act, she was given a lot of freedoms to dictate to the teachers as to when she was going to submit her assignments. And as the teacher, and as somebody who's a lot older, I kind of not I didn't dig in my heels so much because I was very accommodating. At the same time, I sort of wanted to push back a little bit to say that organizations aren't going to be as flexible when it comes to the employees kind of creating the terms of what deadlines. These deadlines, and especially the student wanted to work in public relations, which I'm sure if you know anything about
Yeah.
it, it's deadline focused. It's very
Yeah.
deadline oriented. So for me as a teacher, kind of saying we're not teaching her any life lessons by letting her just dictate when she's going to be submitting her assignments, and we have to sort of collaborate with her to try and find a resolution to this. So my question to you, having given you that background, is I would assume, and you can just correct me if I'm wrong, so I guess there's not a question, I'm just making a statement. If I'm wrong, but like organizations will find ways around that. If the new hire can't meet deadlines, even under the Human Rights Act, they'll find ways to downsize, outsource that employee. Is that right? They'll just find ways, even under the Human Rights Act.
So the idea is that you have to accommodate,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a point of undue hardship.
Mm.
So let me give you an example. We'll take it away from mental health and we'll put it into a physical, because a lot of times that's a lot easier to grasp.
Okay.
So if you have a organization, say like a large telecom organization, and somebody with a disability, a physical disability, needs accommodation to get to a physical location, a large telecom organization would be required to say, put in an elevator to accommodate. The courts will say that's not without reason. That $50, $60, $100,000 to put in a lift is not without reason. If you are a mom and pop bookshop on a second floor of an old heritage building, and you and are told that you need to accommodate a person with a physical disability as an employee, and it's going to cost you $100,000 to put in that lift, the courts will say that's a little bit beyond reasonable accommodation for this size. So it really comes down to the organization, and it comes down to the size, and it comes down to what is considered reasonable. So with somebody like this, we would look at what can we do to help? And we would review it. We would continue on. We would find out what the hurdles are. We would review it again. There's going to be some stumbling blocks. But at some point, if there isn't a way of making sure that we're going to move forward together and we're going to both get a beneficial relationship out of this, there is some point that undue hardship would come into it. Now, whether that be 6 months, 6 years, 16 years, hard to say. But there is a mutual collaboration that has to happen. And that's not to say that the employee drives the accommodation. The employee can say, listen, this is what I would like. And the employer can come to the table and say, this is what we can do. But it's not the employee who drives it. It's a mutual accommodation.
Okay, thank you for that, because that actually helps for me to reframe in my brain how that works, because I was just a little bit I really wanted to be sensitive to the whole issue, and at the same time, like, but we're not. But that helps me a lot, because I'm finding that this is happening a little bit more with like maybe Gen Z. When I'm so glad we're talking about mental health issues in organizations, but it sometimes is a little bit tough when I'm Gen X. It's sort of like you were taught to shut up, sit down and shut up and do as you're told, and get into the workplace and do it. And so now the flexibility of those accommodations, I see that how that can work. So
yeah, and especially like, as a business owner, when you've grown the business from nothing over the course of a decade, you know that there was no sick days. Like there was very little. My father is in a elevator construction business, and when they started the company, he was on call 24/7 for 2 years straight. Like there wasn't a sick day. You didn't have the option. So a lot of us have grown up with that kind of mentality. So now we're looking at, personal days, wellness days. And yeah, 100%, I agree with everybody needs a brain break. Like some days you're like, I am checked out. I can't do it today. But you're coming against that idea that we worked 24/7 to the bone. And you're starting to have this little bit more of a clash.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I worked in a marketing agency years ago. So I would say to them, especially some of the ones that wanted to work in agencies, I'm like, there's times when I work till 11, 12
Yeah.
o'clock at night and back there at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. So don't think that you're just going to be able to like sit at your desk and
Yeah.
just be like, it's just gonna be like, oh, it's gonna be so much fun. It's like a lot of hard work out there, especially when you're just getting,
Yeah.
getting into the business world. Sometimes you got to put the work in. And anyway, but that's maybe a different. Maybe I'm old school. I don't know.
You know what? I don't think I think there's a mentality shift that's going on where like the 24-hour work days are kind of not the badge of honor anymore. And you do have this generation that's coming in that says we want balance.
Yeah.
We don't want to be tied to our desk. Like we want to put in 100% effort, but we want to also, I went on vacation last week for the first time in 3 years and put an out of office in because I now have a team who totally can take the reins in my absence. And I was like, this is amazing. I forgot what out of office feels like. And so we have this balance that we're trying to drive into the new, because when you look at the North American work culture compared to a lot of other areas of the world, we do have this weird drive thing that we're sentimentally attached to.
Hustle culture, right?
The hustle culture. Yeah. I remember having one job when I was working at a retail establishment. I didn't call in sick once in 365 days. I was so proud of myself that I went in there with sinus infection, like times I should not have been in the workplace, but it was a source of pride. And so we're comparing that with a lot of other types of personalities as they come in.
Well, yeah, I'm so old that I remember what it was like to live in a world before we had computers and cell phones. So we weren't accessible 24/7 for sure.
Yeah.
So there's a really interesting question here. I don't know who it is, only because it just says LinkedIn user in the feed. And so this is such a good question that the hiring process typically now requires at least 6 interviews over multiple days with task assessments and spans and weeks and months to be ghosted. And so companies are often looking for a unicorn versus teaching a horse how to fly. So, and it's so true. And so, how can people, oh, it's AJ Hawley. Okay. AJ's asking that question. He's one of my favorite people. Don't tell him that though.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
And I've seen it on both sides. So as recruiters, we sometimes really suck at giving timely communication. As a job hunter, I've also been the one who's applied for a job and sat at the computer for 24 hours wondering why they hadn't returned my call. And I had a friend who was job searching. I was like, you got to understand what goes on. First, we post it and we wait for a number of applications to come in, and then we look at it, and then we put it in front of other people. So there's this lengthy amount of time. So 6 interviews is a lot. I'll be honest. I think especially in this day, so we are moving into this weird recruitment time where it's no longer companies waiting for the 18 applications to come in and we'll sit there and twiddle our thumbs. If you're not on it, I've had a number of applications and offers that we've put out for clients where people accepted and 3 days later accepted something else. There's a lot of competition out there right now for good people. And so companies are having to adapt. We're having to make quicker decisions. We're having to make, one of the things that's been on the plate is we bring them in as quickly as possible as well. Once you let's get them off the market, let's get them in place, because once somebody started a new role and they're happy there, they're less likely to keep dabbling in other things. But yeah, there is a awful, I guess, trend within the recruiting world that you get ghosted. And it's not necessarily intentional. And I apologize on behalf of every recruiter who has ever ghosted you before, because most of us are good, well-meaning. It's just as quickly as days go by to weeks to months, unfortunately, it happens on the same end. And you're not thinking about the one candidate who might just be waiting that this is their lifeline.
Right.
So I know from, forums, from watching LinkedIn a lot, recruiters are like, come on, guys, let's just get back to people with a hard yes or a hard no, or just we're still in status. And that's something that is starting to change in the HR world, of people just being like, hey, just want to check in. No change, no decisions have been made, but just so you know, your name's still on the table. So yeah, absolutely. What can companies to reduce the job search fatigue for applicants? I think you'll start seeing that change, because companies need to get people in quick. If you wait on a person, they might not be there in a week.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that that's starting to change. And AJ's in Florida, and I mean, I often will teach new Canadians. Canadians have landed here from other countries, and they're job prospecting. They've got all sorts of experience from
Mhm.
their home country, and they
Yeah.
come here and they're like, yes, the same thing. Every job posted out there. I don't think I could get hired in social media, even though I teach this stuff for a living, because they are expecting that unicorn person
Yeah.
who knows SEO and writing and analytics and and can.
And graphic design, because obviously if you can content write, you can also do the posting beautifully with brand standards, right?
Absolutely. I know, yeah, all of the above. And I was like, I don't think I could get hired, doing even basic, social media management, even though I teach this stuff. And so this unicorn that is expected in these job postings, which I will say to the people, apply anyway.
Mhm.
I mean, that just because you don't fit all the qualifications, they are looking for that unicorn, but the person who has the most check boxes wins. And that same process that in their home country, Canadians specifically, we do with that whole, like, let's make sure they fit into the corporate culture and let's have those.
Mhm.
So I'm actually, that's interesting that AJ's mentioned that, because like obviously it's happening in the States, and it's not just happening here in Canada, where we
Wow.
have that process certainly has been happening for a long time. And it's a very vulnerable place to be,
Yeah.
to put yourself out there and to be looking for jobs too.
And some organizations might have that 6 interview process. I would highly encourage, companies like shorten that up as much as possible. Like have one video, one in person, and get it done, because you are going to lose them now. Like
Mhm.
people, and the other thing is people are window shopping. Candidates are like, everybody held onto their job for 18 extra months during a pandemic, and now they're like, wonder what else is out there. And so from a company standpoint, there's a lot of people who are just looking in the windows, seeing if it's a better offer, going through the process, saying, I'm good where I am.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of weird thing that's happening in recruitment that makes it a heck of a lot more fun. I guess it's called fun for us as in the HR world to attract. But what it does is it makes us make sure that we can retain. Things
Mm.
have turned to retention. How do we keep the people that we have? How do we make sure that they're engaged with this organization?
Because that's a tough thing. I know that my friend Amy Davies, who has this
Yeah.
company called First 30, and she really talks about the reorg world.
Yeah.
That we were used to our parents having a job for a lifetime, and people will change jobs for many times over their career, and keeping people is probably from an organizational standpoint is probably more effective from a financial perspective.
Absolutely.
Those employees happy.
I was talking to one of our clients, and she had mentioned that they were looking for this certain type of role, and they had somebody who was like a good 70%, but there was a few things they needed to work on. They didn't know if they were the perfect fit, but they were pretty good. And I said, if you brought in somebody new, how many weeks of training do you need to get that person up to speed? Like, let's say 3 to 4 weeks of hard one-on-one. This is what we're doing with the team. And then you're going to need like probably 2 to 3 more months of that finer details, the fit, the culture. This is how we operate. And if you put all those hours together, could you get the person that's already in place up to that 100% that you need them? Because it's going to take a lot less time. It's just we don't think about it in the same way for an internal candidate.
Right.
So there's your horse flying, right?
Yeah, and you probably are familiar with this, the case study, I guess, and I haven't kept up to date with it, which was, oh crap, now I'm not going to remember the Zappos thing, where they had people go through the hiring process, and then at the end of it, at the end of the hiring process, they offered people $2,000 to walk away from taking the job. Were you familiar with that case
No, I
study
didn't
at
hear
all?
that.
Yeah, so I haven't stayed up to date with it, and so the idea was, if you're willing to walk away from 2,000, if you're willing to take the $2,000 and walk away, you're not really committed to the role. And so I guess I'm sure the vetting and the process of getting to that point is probably
Yeah.
a lot different now. But it was an interesting sort of like, wow, that an organization would give you 2,000 to walk away, to say like, how committed are you to stay in this role and stay in this job? It's pretty like, wow, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So how big does an organization need to be before they need to start thinking about human resources, or just like a fractional human resources person like yourself?
Oh, I love this question. So we work primarily with teams of 5 to 50. And we say after about 50, you probably need somebody full-time in the role, because you're looking at turnover, you're looking at recruitment, you're looking at a lot of different aspects of HR. But we work with people with teams of 5. And the great thing about these 5 to 15 number, especially, is because you've got the growth now. And now you're like, hey, we need the systems. We know who we are as an organization. We kind of see our processes. They're starting to be cemented. We're fantastic from the external point of view. Our customers know us. They know our reputation. We have this great service environment. And now we need to work on the inside and make it sure it matches the outside. And that's why we love working with those teams of 5 to 15. But what happened as we were continuing on is we had a lot of people who were solopreneurs and starting to scale. And they're calling us, they're like, what do I do? I've Googled, I spent 3 hours in the deep web trying to find out what CRA needs from me and all this. What do I do? And so we thought, well, we don't have anything. So we started creating this toolbox for scaling solopreneurs to get them from point A to point B. Because let's be honest, Leslie, like you're great at the marketing side. When I started Essential HR, I hadn't a clue about marketing. I haven't a clue what QuickBooks does, but I know I get some pretty reports from it. If I had taken the opportunity to try to learn all those things myself, I wouldn't be able to drive the business forward. But what happens as a solopreneur is we start wearing all the hats. And so we start thinking, okay, I need to hire, but I need to get a job description. What am I going to call this person? How much do I pay them? What does the government need for me to hire them? And we just stop because there's so many unanswered questions that it stops us from taking that hiring leap. And so we've started working with solopreneurs with this toolbox that gets them at a point from, listen, you want to hire? We'll get you everything you need for no excuses to get to those interviews. And so that's what we've been kind of doing with solopreneurs. So the question is, what size do you start need to think about HR before your first employee?
Yeah. That's fascinating because I'm terrified. I'm terrified of bringing anybody else on board for that very reason. It's like, I don't even know where to start, so I'm just not even gonna. And that's holding me back a lot. So that's interesting that you've got all of that toolkit there. So I'm gonna have to get in touch with when we finish talking.
Well, and let's be like, we do the things that we love, right? When we have a to-do list, we're like, hey, you know what? I love doing that. I love doing this. And all the HR stuff that isn't in our wheelhouse starts getting pushed to the bottom. Mm-hmm. And then lo and behold, we don't have enough time to hire because if we had the time, we wouldn't need to hire. And it gets to be this big cluster of issues. And all we need is somebody to help us along. Here's your job description. You're like, wow, this is my job description. All those things that I thought were in my head are now on a paper. And you can move the process through so much easily.
Look at that, Erin. Look at good girl, Erin.
Oh, Erin.
Up there. We love Erin. Yeah, so the toolbox is there with the link and everything. So see, it's great having a good team, right?
Yes.
Good friends, good team.
Thank you awesome. For
that. Really cool because the same thing. I mean, I've been asked to do community management, which is not really. I mean, I can do it, but I brought on one of my former students to sort of do. She's my fractional community manager that I bring her on board because she runs her own business. So I'm sort of working at it. But I haven't wanted to hire somebody on full time just yet. But maybe now I'll take a look at the toolbox and see if there's some things that I can outsource and.
So let me give you a bit of behind the scenes of Essential HR. So when I started Essential HR, it was because I wanted part-time work. And the company I was working for said, nope, can't have part-time. So I said, I'll find it. And I started Essential HR. And then it grew because we found this great niche of working with small businesses. And so I was at the point of, I need to bring on people. And I was like, but I only need part-time. So I ended up falling in line because we offer part-time flexible support to our clients. And I was like, you know what? We offer part-time flexible work to our team as well. And so that became part of our brand. So our team, one of the questions I ask in those interviews is, for our team is, what are you passionate about outside of work? And, you had Erin on here and she was talking about what she does through the Joy Tribe and all of our other business partners as well. I said, I need to know what you're passionate about beyond the hours that you're going to do here, because this is all about giving balance to people who want it. Because I believe if you want an HR job, there's going to be full-time HR gigs out there. But a lot of us are in this place now where we're looking for that balance. Back to Gen Z. I'm not Gen Z, but I was looking for balance and trying to figure out what works. So it's like, if I wanted it, there's got to be other people who also want that opportunity. So that all goes to the question, maybe you don't need full-time. Maybe you look at those part-time opportunities for people who are like, hey, I need this balance in my life.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So having sort of said that, talking about human resources, there's a lot of misconceptions I know. And I was one of those people that when I I was in the .com thing and sort of like went through that where everybody got pink slipped in the year 2000. And so I, like most people, thought that human resource, like recruiters, headhunters,
Yeah.
they're out there, you're out there as a recruiter, actively seeking people and finding, people will ask me, Leslie is a LinkedIn profile writer, how can recruiters find me? And I have
Yeah.
to sort of say to them, I think the misconception is that that human resources and recruiters will find you a job.
Right.
That's not who your client is. So that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions out there, right?
Yeah. So I mean, relationships with recruiters is really great. And if you can get a few, I still have some on LinkedIn that I worked with, a decade and a half ago. But yeah, recruiters are working for the organization, and they're not necessarily recruiting, finding you a job, but there are some fantastic organizations out there that help with your career transition and give you the inside scoop about where to go to network, who to get your name out there with. And I would encourage you, I think, oh gosh, it's not going to come to the top of my head, but I'll throw it in the notes later on if I can think of a few of those organizations that really help with that career transition. So if that is what you're looking for, if you need the additional support, there are some vastly talented people who do help one-on-one with individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, recruiters, they care about finding the right person, which might be you, and then they'll love you.
Yeah.
But really, they're looking for their corporate clients.
Yeah, because that's one of the tips that I'll tell people. And of course, this is your wheelhouse, so you can tell me if I'm full of malarkey or not, which is, I say to people, it isn't networking. So yes, you can build a great LinkedIn profile and I'm a big champion for that.
Yeah.
A great story, really use the right keywords, optimize your presence. But it's not like if you build it, they will come. It is finding your network of quality connections that can help get your foot in the door. So having sort of said that as well is, so if people are looking to connect with hiring managers and they find them on LinkedIn, should they reach out that way? Should they send them? So they use InMail to be like, hey, I'm looking for this job, that I'm looking to get hired in this job, or should they just sort of leave it to the application process?
Yeah. I think you'd get 20 different answers if you ask 20 different people.
Yeah.
I love, our applicant tracking systems because we go back to that communication things. It lets me know who I've talked to, when I've reached out, all of that type of information. And then you get the phone call saying, hey, I applied. I was just wondering, I'm really interested. And I pick up the phone. I was like, well, you applied, so your name's in there. But what it does for me, even though I'm annoyed to pick up the phone, I go looking for them.
Okay.
Oh, their resume was pretty good. You know what? Maybe it was in the viewed pile, but maybe I'll just put it in the maybe pile. So
initiative, because a little bit.
It does. And I'll be completely honest. I hate when people call me with that phone call, but it works.
Yeah.
It really does. And it just gets your name out there. But even more so, it makes you appear that you have some confidence and that you're willing to put yourself out there. So it's not fun. As an applicant, I know it's not fun to make those phone calls either. Like I would want to do it. But as the person receiving it, you're like, oh, this person was like fantastic. They were pleasant. I enjoyed the conversation, even though I couldn't do anything for them. And it just gives that little bit of an edge.
I say that to my students actually at the college too all the time, is to make friends with your teachers, because you never know. They will actually, anybody that you know or anybody you're networking with, if you show initiative and confidence and competency and all those kinds of things, it's much better for your career for you to make those connections, and then people will stick their neck out for you if that's the case. So showing initiative certainly does help, but it is that fear of rejection of like, I'm bothering them. I don't.
Oh no, you absolutely are bothering me, and it worked. It depends on the person. It really depends on the HR. It depends on the HR manager,
right.
And what they really like. But that's my experience when people pick up the phone.
Yeah, and that's oftentimes too, when people ask me questions about hiring, which I always will disclose to them, like I've never been a hiring manager. That's not my wheelhouse. That's why I partner with other people for resume writing and all that other stuff, because that's just not my jam. And I don't never want to promise anybody anything when I don't know if I can deliver or not. So, but you're right. There's going to be 10 different answers for 10 different organizations, whether or not they should be applying on LinkedIn, whether they should apply on the website.
Yeah.
Are there other
all of the above? Yeah. Wherever you find that job posting, get your name in there.
Right. And just keep at it. And then, do you actually pay for, or know anybody that pays for the recruiter premium on LinkedIn? And then how does that work?
No, I don't. I just sponsor postings typically at this point because we typically don't have enough for that recruiter
Expensive.
premium. It is expensive. I was
Right.
so happy when LinkedIn moved to the sponsored postings. I'm like, oh, it's within our budget now for this posting, and it just opens up a few more opportunities for people to see that LinkedIn job posting. But no, I've never used a recruiter. I'd be
Because
interested in, hey, LinkedIn, if you want to give me the free recruiter for 30 days, I'll take a look.
I'm curious to know because of that handshake that often happens. And that's the other thing too, Laura, is that I find that when people will ask me, so should I pay for the jobs premium, which I actually have and I like, is, where is that handshake happening? And I think it just depends on every different organization is a different hiring process. So there's no secret sauce or perfect recipe to follow in order to get to the top of the list. It's just keep due diligence, I guess.
Yeah, like some people love cover letters. Some hiring managers love reading cover letters. I don't typically read a cover letter unless I see some weird thing in the resume and I go to the cover letter to say, can you explain why you didn't work for 17 years? And they say, hey, I took this time off with my family. Awesome, cool. That makes sense. So that's the only time I read the cover letter. So some people are like really, sticky on, did you put the right title, like dear so-and-so on the cover letter? I'm like, I don't even read it. So like the person who searched out my name, I apologize in advance. Like,
Yeah.
I want to see the resume.
And so because of the process, the amount of time, it's like less than 6 seconds, I think it takes to sort of like skim through a resume. And then like for your process, do you typically then go onto LinkedIn? Like how important is LinkedIn? I'm hoping you're going to say good things, but yeah. How important is LinkedIn in the hiring process, Laura?
Yeah, it really depends on the person. So when we have a lot of high volume candidates at more of an entry level, I don't touch LinkedIn. When I'm looking at controllers, when I'm looking at, other HR managers that we've hired for companies, I'm looking at LinkedIn. Who do we know? Who's in common? What have people said about you, even though it might have been 12 years ago? I do look at those postings. I also look at Facebook sometimes, or I'll just Google the name to see what comes up. And thank God, when I was at starting my career, when you Googled my name, it came up with my like height and weight stats from University Varsity Wrestling. Thank God that's not on the first thing you see anymore. But yeah, like what is out there in the world about you that I can connect with, or that, might give pause. So there's one time where I did that, and the Facebook had this person had privacy settings all over their Facebook, except for like 2 posts, one of which was had to phone it in at work again today. And it was one of those weird things that happened 10 years ago. And I was like, why is this the only post that shows up on your Facebook page with privacy settings? And granted, it wasn't a great environment, and she was, talking to her supervisor, but why? It
Don't do it.
It just gives pause, right? You just like, oh, but you were so great. Why did you throw this out there?
Oh yeah, and that's one. I before we went live, I told you quickly that that's the first assignment that I give my students at the college is they have to audit their digital footprint and act. Ideally, the goal is for them to be very objective and to act as a recruiter. And through the lens of the recruiter, would you hire you based on your digital footprint? And to your point, Google your name. What's coming up? Is it a good first impression? Is it, are you being a little feral? Are you the posts that you're sharing? From a public perspective, would someone say like that's racist, that's sexist, those those are inappropriate things, and we all have to be careful, because everything is so accessible. And the other thing that I scare the crap out of them, and I say, you realize all the stuff that you're sharing is there in perpetuity, that your great grandchildren at some point are going to Google you, and this nonsense is going to come up. Are you proud of that? That
aren't you glad we didn't we were raised in like the 70s and 80s? Like, my gosh, thank God there was no social media when I was a teenager.
I know it is a little scary, but I've hammered it into my 14-year-old. And so he's afraid, but then I think the kids talk about it too, about this cancel culture. So there's that fear of, okay, well, we can't, and he's obviously probably a little bit better at, being a little bit more politically correct because they've been raised that way. So sometimes he'll be like, Mom, you can't say those things. Or don't talk like there's some dumb stuff that I've done or said or things that he'll just like, don't stop talking. Just stop talking.
Leslie, on the flip side of that, as much as candidates should be kind of perusing their own, employers aren't looking at their websites and looking at what's being put out there about themselves. So if you've ever had somebody who's been looking for a job, you're like, oh, I'm going to check out this place. They apply and they go to look for this potential business employer, and they can't find anything about who they are. And so when you sit down and then like, hey, so why are you interested in this role? They're like, well, I couldn't really find much about them, but it looks like a great company. And
Yes.
then if you don't promote yourself, whether it be through your LinkedIn business page, whether it be through your website or alternate, social media sites, people are going to start looking at Glassdoor. They're going to start looking at your Google reviews. They're going to start looking at, and the other one's not coming to mind that people put their reviews on, and those are things you cannot control. And so the impression you want to leave is really important, and building that out as an employer, not just as like for the customer's perspective, but for your potential future employees' perspective.
Yeah, and any kind of stakeholder. So I'm so glad you said that, because I work with a lot of executives, and that's especially the first few profiles that I wrote for these executives. They'd be like, "Well, I'm not even looking for a job. Why do I need a LinkedIn profile? Why do I need that optimized?" Like, you're the forward-facing brand ambassador for the organization, and so that, to your point, when potential employees are vetting, do I want to work at this organization? What are the senior executives? Like, do they have a personality? What is their experience? Do I want to learn from these people? Do I want to work at this organization? So thank you for saying that, because it actually supports everything that I believe to be true. But trying to get sometimes those they're my age. I'm 51 this year. And so they're all like, oh, this social media stuff. And it's like it's for the kids. And I'm like, I've been around, around for social media for like 20 years now, and digital for 10. I get it. It's maybe not your jam, but
but humor me and just forward that post on LinkedIn that we're looking for that person to your entire network that you don't even know that you have.
Yeah, exactly. And having the senior executives involved in the discussion too is so great. There's so many statistics about that stuff, but so tooting my own horn here. So I have a question for you. Like, you had a question here about the how does a company brand and an employer brand, how do they intersect?
Yeah. So we're going to talk about Zappos. We can throw out some other great names like WestJet, Tim Hortons, McDonald's, Target. And we all have immediate adjectives that come to mind as a customer when we think of those brands. Whether it's been through media, through personal experience, we get these kind of visions of what it is that that brand represents. But I want you to flip that. So instead of thinking of it as a customer, think about McDonald's as an employer. And what do you immediately feel? Or Target as an employer. What is that feeling? WestJet. That's the employer brand. And whether that feeling comes from personal experience, maybe a friend or a family member worked there, whether it comes from what's been put out there on, WestJet has done some great advertising about, the WestJet family. McDonald's has forever had great training programs. I've never worked for McDonald's. I know very few people who have.
I did. My first job when I was 15.
Yeah, it is ingrained in me that McDonald's trains their people well. And so you have these ideas of what they are as an employer. And so we focus so often on what is our external brand as a company, and we forget to include who are we representing ourselves as an employer? What's our employer story? Why do people want to work for us? And sometimes when you're like, that's great for like the 200-person company, or like, Walmart, they've got a great employer story, blah, blah, but I'm for people. Why do I need an employer story? Well, you're competing for the same top talent as the 50-person company, as the 500-person company. And you need to know what you represent as an employer. And let me tell you, sometimes these small businesses, we've got such a fantastic employer story. We hide behind it. We don't even tell it, because people want to feel connection. And if they sit eyeball to eyeball with you and you can tell them about the passion that you have for the business and what you're building, all of that, your employer story, you're going to be able to win out over $5,000 more of an offer down the street, or, a few better hours, or that connection is so important. So whether you're 500 people or whether you're 5, making sure you can craft that employer brand and know who you are as an employer is so important.
Oh, I love that so much. I'm such a big champion for brand too, because and I think a lot of that does, especially with the next generation, where it isn't just a job anymore. They want to go for making a difference. What is is your organization sustainable? Are they into diversity? Like having different perspectives and things like that. So I think that's like telling that story is so crucial. Yeah. So thank you for like acknowledging that, because I think it is. It can sometimes set an organization apart, whether you're a solopreneur against the big guys out there, for sure. About, are you just a number, or do you matter? And I think that's what we really want to feel like at the end of the day that I did a good job and that I matter and that people really care about me and that I'm not just a number.
When going back to that generational difference, we used to say, go back 10 or 15 years, I'm not friends with the people I work with. They're just my coworkers. And that has changed. And I still hear that sometimes. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. But Lord knows it's a heck of a lot better if I can enjoy the people I work with every day than, just work with them and get through it. And so we are slowly moving into that kind of culture where people want to enjoy the team. So if you've got a great team, that's part of your culture. And don't just say we have a great team, like introduce them to the team in the interview process, make them feel like they're already friends. And then when you present that offer at 45,000 and they get another offer at a big company who's big dangling a carrot of 48,000 and company growth and, climb the ladder, you're going to say, yeah, but those people were awesome.
Right. Yeah.
And that's really better than $3,000 a year.
Right. Yeah. And maybe having more flexibility and there's less process and there, all those kinds of other things too. So what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that organizations are making when they make that new hire?
Okay. So I would say the number one mistake is not being prepared. So as business owners, we have 18 billion details of what this new hire is going to do, how they're going to do it, what it's going to look like, and we keep it in our head. And then, somebody in HR says, you need a job description. You're like, I don't have time. I don't know what that looks like. So we just keep it in our head and we start hiring a person that we don't actually know what it looks like, whether it's a unicorn or not. It needs to be on paper because we need a job description that's going to tell us what this person's going to do. What do they need to have in their arsenal of experience and what type of personality that they need to have. So maybe you have a great operation, but you work with some tough clients. And you need to know that this person has to have a backbone because sometimes you got to push back, and it shows respect in that industry, perhaps. Or perhaps that you're a very independent organization. Maybe you're all remote and somebody has to have the ability to be remote, but still be part of a team. And if somebody needs to have constant communication as part of that team and jiving, they might not work well in that remote environment. So that job description is the cornerstone for you building a bulletproof hiring strategy. And that job description is also going to say what success looks like. So in your industry, especially in the social media world, somebody might be hiring a social media practitioner and you're like, okay, content writing, graphic design, SEO, we need all these things. And you find somebody and they show you their portfolio and you're like, this is fantastic. It's beautiful. The content is great. Only to realize they can do one post a day. Right. It's a great post, but there's only one. So that job description also outlines what are the expectations for success. So that job description also changes into your job posting. Now, your job posting is not going to be the same as your job description. Your job posting is your dating profile. It's the courting. It's the why somebody wants to work for you. Why do they even want to apply? So it's going to be a shortened version of the job description and a heck of a lot of information about you as an employer. That job description also turns into your interview guide. Boom, interview guide, done. As opposed to Googling, what do I ask in an interview and asking 18 questions that don't even make sense to what you're doing. Your job description is the basis for that. And then it turns into your training plan. So what's the number one mistake is not having a solid job description.
That is so cool because I don't think I've ever seen one that has that story involved. And of course, I haven't been looking for a number of years, but that's really cool because you're right. If you're not setting people up for success and sort of setting the goal, like, can you be nimble? Can you do this? And some people, that's not their jam. They're really good at following the rules. Some people need to be really creative, and it's really finding that good fit. I think most people, when they're looking for jobs, at least I felt the same way, was the coming from the place of vulnerability of they're up here and I'm down here. And that's not necessarily the case. And I've always heard, in theory, well, you're looking for the job just as much as they're looking for you. Yeah. When you're not getting paid, it's
100%. Yeah. But it's the onus of the interviewer to really make sure that person is going to fit well in the culture. And I know somebody asked about fit versus, fit can be sometimes a bad word, but fit comes to, and I'll give you an example from our own. When we were hiring our last business partner, one of the amazing women that worked for me put a question in the interview guide that says, the gist of it was, can you work without all the details? So what happens when you have a project or a task, you don't have all the details? What do you do about it? And I looked at it and I laughed. I said, that's about me, isn't it? She's like, maybe. And I'm like, oh no, I very well know. I'm like, here's what I need you to do. Figure it out. And that's how I operate, because I hire great, fantastic, beautiful minded people who can do it. But that's not everybody's forte. Some people really like to know A, B, C, and D, and they will execute A, B, C, and D to the best degree possible, but they need that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're the bad term micromanager, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just a personal stance. If you're a person who gives A, B, C, and D, you need to find the person who likes to take direction. Because if you look at that big overarching picture and that's the person, just says, give me the top line and I'll fill in the rest, but you're giving A, B, C, and D, that's going to demotivate them.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fantastic. Because I took a course when I started up my business 10 years ago. I took this course in True Colors.
Yeah.
That was so fascinating to realize I'm a very blue followed by green and like all the different colors. And so that the yellows, the very process driven people love like timekeeping and checklists, and the oranges love new, novel, and different, and change, and all that other stuff. Like change, I don't know if I love change so much. And it's just it is interesting that people will you have to sort of know your own strengths and then fall into those strengths and really embrace them, as opposed to trying to be something that you're not, for sure.
Yeah. And you need to hire sometimes the opposite of who you are.
That's true.
So sometimes we look for carbon copies of ourselves and we think, oh, they have kids the same age as me and we all go to the same soccer league and they must be a fantastic person. And we connect with them and we throw away our interview guide and forget to ask half the questions of whether they can do the job. Yeah, we're going to be best friends and go for wine on Friday night, but they can't do the work.
Right. And I think that kind of circling back to originally with the conversation about being the solopreneur, is what is you hire you sell your strengths and hire your weaknesses.
Yes.
Right. So it's better to have someone who complements you and is the opposite of you in so many ways, because to your point, like, you may be all lovey-dovey and find that it's all great. And, we love working together, but we're both doing the exact same thing. And sometimes we need to find someone to do the opposite. So, yeah. Yeah. So what do you think some of the biggest mistakes are people can say, do, make during the interview process? I mean, we talked about some of that is like making sure you have a really good digital footprint, I think is important. What about the interview process?
So I'm going to start from the beginning of the interview process. So you've called somebody in and they've come into your establishment, or they've, we'll say we'll pretend we still have physical workspaces. And because we've all, I'm sure at one time, can relate to this. You come in 15 minutes early, you sit down, you smile nervously at the receptionist and everybody else that, walks by you. You get the little nod and you sit there anxiously wondering if you have lipstick on your teeth for some of us. And then you wait till the 10 o'clock interview, and then the 10:15, and then 10:20 rolls by and find, oh, I'm so sorry, got caught up in this. And cool, it happens. I get it. But this is your first impression with the person that you're wanting to join your team. So then you sit down. Again, we've all had this experience and they've never even looked at your resume. Does it happen as a business owner? Absolutely. We are busy. But there's an impression that we want to leave with people, that they are valued and their time is valued just as much as our time is valued. And so when we present a front where, if they show up 15 minutes and we're like, cool, let's try to bring them in sooner so they're not anxiously waiting for that first handshake. And let's make sure that we understand that their time is valuable, because that's going to start that engagement process. And for some of us, let's be honest, that's super simple. We've met those hospitable people, right? Those people that you're like, I just want to work for you because you're the most, it just comes naturally. And for some of us, we work at it. We work at it to create that environment, to make sure that somebody feels welcome. And, the first thing that pops in my mind when somebody sits down in front of me is not to offer them a glass of water. It's never been to offer them a glass of water, because I don't have that naturally hospitable spirit where some people are like, can I get you a coffee? Like, it just comes naturally. So we have to really look at the whole experience of that interview. And if you're leaving somebody hanging, if you're feeling like, you're not building that relationship from day one, then you're going to have problems on the outside of it. Mm-hmm. $48,000 down the street for your 45 isn't going to win because you haven't created that bond.
And that absolutely happened to me in a job interview where I went to the job interview and the person just sort of showed up and was like, had their I'd seen that they'd gone to Starbucks. They had the time to go to Starbucks, but they didn't have time to show up to the meeting on time. And I would just like, this doesn't sit right. I still took the job anyway. And I was like, thankfully I've met a lot of good friends out of it, but it was not a good job.
Well, and
.com that I told you about. It was
And
Yeah.
on that too, like, so we love this idea of, oh yeah, it's just, I get that gut feeling and I just know when I meet somebody, I just know. And that's fantastic. I truly believe gut feelings are fantastic. But I also think hard facts and gut feelings put together make for a bulletproof decision.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have an interview, and again, maybe you've had one of these where it's just easygoing, right? No real interview guide, no formality. It's just a conversation. And those are fun. But every time I walked away from those as a candidate, I was like, they didn't really ask me anything. Like, they don't really know what my skills are. Like, unless I really understood how to present myself well, they didn't ask about my background, my experience, or what I would do in this situation. It leaves the candidate a little bit uneasy. So when we look at that interview guide, and that interview guide is based off of our job description, it's going to ask the things that we need to know to make a good hiring decision. And then we've put it with the gut feeling, you're bulletproof.
Yeah. Bulletproof. Look at you. You
Bulletproof. Bring it full circle.
Why we're even talking today. So, oh my God, I can't believe we're getting so close to the end. So, I have so many questions for you already. But like, how do you think? Okay, so leveraging the business and social media accounts during the hiring process. How can that work? For leveraging business and personal social media accounts.
So we're going to do it twofold. We're going to do it in the proactive. So putting information out there about your team, just little tidbits, little things to make them hungry about, who you are as an employer. There was one, a McGee & Company. They now have a Netflix, but I followed them prior to them becoming a Netflix sensation. And when she posted that they were looking for a new person in wherever Utah, I was like, oh, I don't live in Utah. But there was just this position that their social media had, that when they said, we're looking to hire, I didn't even know what the position was, but I was interested. So leaving those nuggets through your Instagram about what it's like to work at your organization, who you are as a business versus just hard facts, is really important. On the second hand, when you have to be reactive, so you have a position available, leverage your social media. Some people say, well, I don't want them to know like so-and-so left. Who's going to know your business better, or who would fit in with your business better than the people who follow you, who like you, who comment on your, so use that. It doesn't have to be a full job description. One of my favorite things is when people go on Instagram Live and say, hey guys, we're hiring. This is what we need. If you want to come work for us, it's like the best information in front of the right people. And those right people are your audience. And they might not be the people that you're going to hire, but they'll be, hey, Leslie, you got to go check out these guys. They might be the perfect job for you, because they already know who you are. They already know your standards. They already know your reputation. So,
and they're more likely to love you if they're going to follow you and so forth, for sure.
Yeah.
And the other thing I also find is, and this is the other part of the LinkedIn training that I do, is turning your team into your brand ambassadors.
Yes.
Have them share the job posts, because if they have connections and they can bring in great people, I mean, that's the low-hanging fruit right there, right?
And in most teams aren't going to suggest somebody to come for you to hire unless they want to actually work with them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right.
So like, your referrals, for the most part, don't get me wrong, there's every once in a while is a weird one in there, but for the most part, your referrals are going to be some of your best employees.
Yeah.
So even before you go out into spending $400 at Monster or $350 at ZipRecruiter, ask your people, who do they know?
Yeah.
Because those people are going to have a loyalty. They already have an ingrained loyalty when their best friend or, buddy from college is working next to them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that there's probably maybe some issues when someone says, oh, I totally want my bestie to come work with me. But I mean, the company leaves that person out if they're not a good fit.
Yeah.
Having said that, if I'm staking my professional reputation on saying this, I'm going to bring this person in, I'm going to stake my professional reputation on them, they better show up and do a good job. Right.
Well, and I find this works the best in like labor positions. So in the construction world, in like where your team, if you're all not hauling it, if there's somebody who's not hauling it, then it's felt and nobody likes them. So they're not going to bring on somebody who isn't going to give as much as they give.
Yeah. Nobody wants to be embarrassed by like, oh gosh, I brought on my bestie. Yeah, we love to have cocktails together, but they're kind of an idiot, and they made me look bad because I stake myself on that. So,
well, and I've had people with a resume saying, this is my cousin, but I said I had to give it to you.
Oh yeah, I've done that too, right? Where people are like, can you introduce me to so-and-so? Sure, I can. And then I send them a private message. I don't know them that well. Well, don't trust.
I have 2,000 LinkedIn followers. Don't believe that they know me.
Yeah. So I can't believe this time is like flown by. Like I've enjoyed this conversation so much. So are there any last words, a mantra, a motivational phrase that you have that you want to share with people out there?
Oh, gosh. You know what? I would go back to the whole idea of, business and being that head of a business, leading a business, starting a business. And when it comes to hiring, take the hiring leap. So there's going to be 100 reasons why it's not the right time. And I think if you talk to anybody who had to hire that first person, they always say it was the best decision. Maybe it didn't even work out well, but it was really a decision that had to be made, because it's really about us at the end of the day with those first employees coming on board. So yeah, I guess my motto would be take the hiring leap.
Okay, Laura. I'm terrified. Actually, it's been a good experience because I did hire. I should have her on here chatting too. I hired one of my former students who was like an amazing student, and she has her own business as well. And so I hired her on to help me with community management. It was a really good decision to do that because I know her, I like her, I trust her. She did amazing work. So you're right. I mean, once you sort of get past that, like I can do it all myself. I think that's the worst thing that we as solopreneurs do is like, if you want this girl to tap dance, I'll tap dance. Well, that's not what I'm best at. So find those people that can help expand your business. And I think Seth Godin says that quite frequently. What does he say? I'm not going to get that right, but it basically, if you're a solopreneur, you're just a freelancer. You're not actually, it's a different mindset of being a solopreneur versus somebody who's a small business owner who's looking to grow and expand. And that's terrifying for me, even though I will call
it's
you.
Your business. It's your baby. And like, let's be honest, I took, when you gave your first child to daycare, it was like, the second one, you're like, here you go. The third one, you're like, they're the car. Can you grab them? And that's the same thing with hiring your first employees. So that first one, it's tough. Like no bones about it, but it's a great decision.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that this is an option, like, because I didn't even know that this was an option. So I'm so glad that Erin introduced us. And so how can people reach you if they're looking to, get more information about you, organizations that want to invest with you for things like, your toolkit or more?
So essentialhr.ca is where you can find us on the web. There's some great downloads there, including some of our favorite interview questions right on that homepage that you can grab. And then LinkedIn, obviously, we are Essential HR Canada, and we like to keep it light and fluffy, a little bit of facts intermixed with some humor. And then myself, you can always add me personally on LinkedIn as well under Laura Tolhook.
Awesome. And AJ, I think, was asking whether you work with companies in the States as well. Yep. And so Erin chimed in and said, yeah, you do. You work with companies in the US as well. So awesome.
Yeah, people are very similar across the border, surprisingly.
Well, I just wondered if the laws around all, like, because I guess you'd have to know, like the employee laws in, I guess, every province would be different, every state would be different, and so forth.
Yeah,
right?
The states are very different. And they have municipal aside from state and federal. So it's a little bit even different than Canada. But yeah, we do have some clients in the US as well.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Well, I have just absolutely thoroughly enjoyed. This is our first meeting and I love you already. And so I can't wait for cocktails. Erin, let's go for cocktails. Let's you and me and Laura go.
Let's do it.
So thank you so much. And if anybody wants to, ask Laura, go ahead and ask her some questions, join her, with Essential HR. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I've absolutely enjoyed this so thoroughly. And I know there's a lot of people that will have some really great takeaways from today as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation.
Thanks so much. Okay, we'll talk to you soon.
Bye now.
Bye for now.